So, here's everything you need to know about Trump's plan on tariffs, on basically everything that has happened and everything that is probably going to happen. Take it from someone that has been watching and trading the stock market for the last 2.5 years and has predicted the week of the stock market for the last 30 weeks. The initial plan was Trump's tariffs, obviously on the surface level, was to put tariffs to make a lot of companies come to the US and actually not produce cheap manufacturing overseas for many reasons, but the main reason was economically, to just have many investments in the US, make people create their stuff in the US, which is also going to create jobs, higher quality of the products. Maybe they're going to cost more, but it's still like the overall plan, but because it's going to boost the economy of the US. Long term, that is a sustainable plan. I don't support anyone in the political spectrum, right? Like, it's not like a pro-Trump or a negative Trump fucking video, like, right? Like, this is just my opinion and what I think is probably going to happen coming from someone who actually has knowledge about that stuff. The tariffs have been in place ever since the creation of the United States, if you don't know. Ever since the Declaration of Independence, since till 1913, where the Federal Reserve was created, we had tariffs funding the US because taxation was considered unconstitutional. Because if you didn't know, the US War of Independence started because of taxation. Anyway, but that is not the point. Like, tariffs have been around, like 60-70% tariffs have been around because that was what was funding the government ever since the creation of the United States. So everybody's saying, oh, something that is a new concept. It's not a new concept. The most important thing is, just like I said, I mean, those tariffs, he plays those tariffs to bring a lot of investments, and then we have actually gotten a lot of investments from the Arab countries, from Japanese, from the Toyota companies from Japan. A lot of companies have started moving to the US because Trump is making it unsustainable to make people manufacture and sell in the US and then sell into the US, so that he's forcing companies to come to the US, create jobs, and boost the US economy. But that is not the point. That is basically surface level, right? I mean, why Trump wanted to impose even the tariffs even in the first place, right? What you need to know is another thing that is super important about Trump's administration, of what he's doing. Obviously, this is just a theory, but this is what economists are also saying he's probably targeting, right? He hasn't come out and said this, but that is what also many economists are speculating he's doing, is that he wants to crash the bond market. Why is this important? So the US has a spending problem. I don't know if y'all know this, but the US has a spending problem. Obviously, we fund the government with taxes and tariffs and many other stuff, right? And we fund it with taxes, and usually they have a spending problem. They have, let's say we fund them $1 million worth of taxes, and they need to spend, and they spend about $2 million on many other things, maybe loans that they have, stuff that they owe, maybe they overspend on funding other countries or something like that. It doesn't even matter, but the US has a spending problem, and this is why the US national debt has gone up ever since literally almost every presidency in the last 40 years. Because no president seems to actually care about fixing that debt, because it's actually not as simple as people think. Take many drastic measures to actually fix a bubble like that, like the US national debt. Because if you don't know, it's about 36 trillion worth of debt, which is almost 1.5 times the US national GDP. And what the US does basically, because they have to overspend, take out a loan in the form of a bond, which it gives it to investors. Investors pay money for that, and it says, okay, we're going to give you 4% interest on that thing that we give you, that bond. The bond market goes up. We usually have a problem with the US because it's paying lots and lots of, usually in the billions, sometimes even in the trillions worth in the bond market, because the interest is so high and bond market is rising. And that's why Trump also wanted to refinance the debt, because he wants to drop the bond market so that he can pay less on the investors, because they're going to owe less in interest. The other problem that Trump is battling with is the Federal Reserve, because it also is refusing to lower interest rates, because it's not convinced yet that inflation story has been wrapped with, which is another thing that we're going to talk about in a bit. But that is another thing that he's battling, because when interest rates are up, the US also has to pay way more in interest to pay back the debt, and is actually staggering crazy. He's trying to bring down the bond market, obviously, as I mentioned, why he's trying to do that. He's trying to bring down the dollar to make the dollar more attractive to many countries, because it's way cheaper. And as you can see, this is a chart of the dollar actually going way down. It's easier to buy products in the US, at least for the short term, obviously, because that's what he's thinking. It's gonna make business worldwide, because the dollar is the worldwide currency. It's gonna make business worldwide way easier for mainly the most amount of countries. Really, all the markets are going to drop, obviously the S&P and all that, and the dollar, the bond market. He did mostly achieve everything, but are we going to have a recession? The data says otherwise. GDP, basically, by a recession usually is 2 quarters of shrinking GDP. We got, and now the last GDP also came in negative. We have negative 0.4% and negative 0.3%. So now we're sitting in deep waters, meaning that it's probably going to get a bit ugly in the next months or so. Maybe the new tariff plans are going to not work, or something along these lines probably going to happen where he's going to have to do something or pivot. Obviously, long term is going to help, but for the short term, we are going to see many down effects. Obviously, I still think we're going to have another crash. But that's just me. Obviously, this might just be just a correction. Now we hit all-time highs because we have largely recovered, by the way. But obviously, economic data says otherwise. You can see for yourself. Here's the overall economic data. Basically, that the data is mixed, the economy is mixed. The stock market is also, but even though the stock market has mostly recovered, we still have many things to worry about throughout the economy. So, in my humble opinion, we're probably going to see another crash. Maybe, but this year alone, I don't think the next year is gonna be any crash. This year is supposedly gonna be any downside we're gonna have is probably gonna be this year. The next 3 years are probably gonna be up. I'm gonna see also many countries actually pivoting and reaching out to get good, way better tariff deals that we had with them beforehand. Obviously, the EU reached out. Many other about 100 countries after Trump mentioned the tariffs for every single country that they've imposed tariffs on the US. They are going to, mostly over half reached out that they're going to have, that they want a better deal with them, including South Korea, Japan. I still do believe in the short-term pain, long-term gain motto, but I still think in the short-term pain is going to be a bit more bleeding than people think it's going to. So in summary, Trump wants to boost jobs, manufacturing, and obviously reduce the bond market, refinance the debt, make everything cheaper so he can enforce his policies a bit easier, fix the huge problems that the US have been facing for like years. Obviously, it's not going to be an easy task. He's probably going to be faced with a lot of backlash, which he's probably going to have courts up his ass. He's probably going to have a lot of problems dealing with this.
Then what the fuck? This guy is a fucking assbag. Like, I give a fuck.
Even though he wants to pull it off, we'll see. I mean, if he pulls it off, hey, great. I mean, I'm not gonna complain. I'm not gonna say anything because many people are actually doubting him, and many economists are actually doubting that he can fix, obviously, the debt issue, the inflation issue, and all that. Obviously, inflation has gone down ever since Trump came into office. He has gone down from 3%, I believe it was, 3.1, 3% basically, to 2.3% right now, 2.4, 2.3% if I am not mistaken, which is what Powell also wants the Fed, basically everyone in the Fed. And obviously, when we reach the 2% mark, the Fed is going to want to negotiate and actually reduce the rates, finally making Trump's plan to pay back and refinance the debt even, a bit more realistic. Coming from someone who has also predicted this crash. I mean, I predicted back in September 2024 that we're going to have a crash around February and March. And we actually picture perfect got that. That is nothing new. We know for certain because every single indicator that there is, it's pointing that we're going to go into recession. So it's guaranteed that in the next 6 to 8 months, we're going to go into a recession. That is guaranteed. That is not an if, it's a when.